dance for anybody that thought I was going to have a thick Scottish accent. I did not.
Louder.
Louder?
Yeah.
Put the microphone on.
Yeah, put a little.
You
Yeah.
had show people up here before. How's that? Is that a little better? Is
Yes.
that good? All right. Somebody know what this is called?
Yeah.
Somebody said it's foreign. Nicely done. It literally translates to purse. So, guys, it's okay if you wear a purse. All right.
He made it.
My name is Mark Fannin, and I've lived in Wayne County my entire life. I was 57 years old when I learned that the man I thought was my biological father wasn't. But that's not where the story starts. The man on my birth certificate was Robert Fannin. His name was also on the birth certificates of my two older sisters, Vicky and Tammy. But Robert left before I was even a year old. My parents divorced shortly after I was born, and he disappeared out west. So I grew up without a dad. I did well in school without a dad to be proud of me. I played baseball and football without a dad sitting in the stands. I learned to shave, tie a tie, and ask girls out without the guidance of a father. I went to college, got my first job, got married, had 4 kids, all without a dad to share it with. Now, my story wasn't all dark. I had 2 wonderful sisters, an incredible mother who worked long shifts at the Frito-Lay factory right here in Worcester. That job came with one amazing perk: fresh Doritos made that day. If you ever get a chance to eat Doritos that fresh, you must try them. It's practically a religious experience. But if I'm being honest, I was pretty angry growing up. Angry that I didn't have a father. Now, in the 70s and 80s, a lot of my friends had divorced parents, so I couldn't act like I was the only one. And I also understood that sometimes it's better to have no dad than a bad dad. Still, in those quiet moments, I felt sorry for myself. There was a stepfather in the picture for a while. Some might say, Mark, you surely learned a lot from him. Oh, I did. I learned how not to be a father, how not to be a husband, and how not to treat people you love. He was an alcoholic who abused my mother, and when I was 17, I finally had enough. One night I stepped between them and told him exactly what I thought of him. He knew how to fight, but for some reason he didn't. And after that night, he never laid a hand on my mother again. Years later, he had a massive heart attack. I gave him CPR until the ambulance came, but he died on the way to the hospital. And that pretty much closed the chapter on father figures in my life. Or so I thought. Years passed, then in 1993, we got word from the government that Robert Fannin, my supposed father, had died in Hot Springs, Arkansas. My oldest sister, who's sitting right there, and I flew down there to meet the people who knew him, hoping to learn something about the man I never had. It had been a dozen years since we last saw the Fannin side of the family, so we returned to Ohio and told them what we learned. While we were there, one of my aunts pulled me aside and said something strange. She said there had always been a family rumor that I wasn't Robert's son. Then she looked at me and said, but after meeting you, I can tell you are. And at the time I just thought it was odd, but later I realized something. That was clue number 1. Years later in 2017, my mother called a family meeting, which she had never done before. Immediately I texted my sisters. They said it's probably about our other sibling. I said, what other sibling? Turns out my mom had gotten pregnant shortly after I was born and gave the baby up for adoption. Very noble thing, by the way. So at 49 years old, I discovered I had another sibling. Now, technically, I have 6 sisters, but that's a story for another time. I remember thinking, please, God, give me a brother. And well, at that family meeting, my mom finally says, that's the interesting part. It is a brother. So suddenly I had a brother named Les. And meeting him has been one of the most supportive and positive surprises of my life. But after learning about him, I looked at my mom and I asked a very important question. Are there any other family surprises we should know about? She looked me straight in the eye and said, No, that's it. Now, if you're paying attention to the story, you know that was mistake number one. I should have asked more questions. A few years before that, my wife and I took DNA tests through Ancestry DNA. I saw all the expected relatives from my mother's side, but there was one glaring issue. Not a single person named Fannin showed up. Not one. That should have been a huge red flag. But I convinced myself that maybe none of the Fannins had taken the test, which was mistake number two. Fast forward 8 more years. In July of 2025, my sister Vicky noticed something strange. She says our DNA match said we shared about 27% DNA. That percentage doesn't match full siblings. It matches half siblings. Of course, I immediately dismissed it as bad data, which made it both clue number 2 and mistake number 3. But 6 days later, I had an overwhelming feeling that I needed to call my sister and talk about it again. She asked me to search our DNA matches for the name Fannin. She had several, I had none. Suddenly, that excuse I made years earlier smacked me right in the face. Other Fannins had taken a test. That night, I ordered another DNA test through 23andMe. Now, my sister Tammy had already tested there, so I figured this new test would prove we were full siblings and everything would go back to normal. Spoiler alert, that was mistake number 4. The results took 29 days. But during that time, I learned something interesting. About 5% of people who take these tests discover a parent isn't biologically related. And the stories usually end up one of 3 ways, which are not good. The parent is dead, the parent reconnects briefly, then disappears, or the parent doesn't want contact at all. So I prepared myself for disappointment. Then finally on August 15th, at 2:44 in the afternoon, the results arrived. I didn't want to open them alone, so I waited 3 hours for my wife to finish work. I had already waited 57 years. It was 3 more hours. I logged in. I saw my mother listed as my mother. Good start. I saw my brother listed as my half-brother. Also good. Then I saw my sister Tammy listed as half-sister. All the air left my lungs. I looked at my wife and I said, I cannot believe I'm not a Fannin. My whole identity was tied to that name. I even owned several kilts because of my supposed Scottish heritage. And the strangest thing was, nothing around me changed. Same room, same life, same wife, same memories. But somehow the ground under my whole story had shifted. Then I saw a name I had never seen before, an uncle. Jerry Smith. I didn't have an uncle, but apparently I did. I asked my mother, and then I called my mother and I asked my mother for my father's name, and she said, I'd rather not say. After gently confronting my mother with all of the evidence I had, she finally told me the truth. My father's name was Lloyd Smith. So my wife Lisa and daughter Jillian spent the entire evening frantically scouring the internet for details on my father. They found photos, phone numbers, email, physical addresses, school yearbooks, everything. And then the phone calls commenced for days. So that Friday morning I woke up as a Fannin and I went to bed as a Smith. Incidentally, my wife's maiden name is Smith. So officially she's Lisa Smith. She didn't have to go through all that documentation to change her name, whatever. So for a little while I was angry. Angry about the secrecy, angry about the lost years. But then something incredible happened. 6 days, whatever. 6 days later, my father called me. We talked for 55 minutes. Good grief. And he told me something that completely changed everything. How many times I've read this and didn't tear up? He said that all these years he had kept a 1-year-old baby picture of me on his wall. The son he never knew. And of course that part choked me up because it's choking me up right now. He had even tried to ask about me back in the 70s, And someone told him that the little Fannin boy had died. So for decades, he believed his son was gone. Until a 57-year-old man came charging back into his life. About a month later, I drove to Kentucky, and I met him. And we've talked almost every day since. He never had any other biological children, but when I showed up, I brought 4 kids and 4 grandchildren with me. And they welcomed us like we had always been there. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry about all the years we lost, but honestly, I'm not. People make decisions based on what they know at the time. My story started with a man I thought was my father, who wasn't. And I spent 57 years wondering what it would have been like to have a dad. It turns out, I had one the whole time. We just didn't know where to find each other. And at 57 years old, I finally learned who my father wasn't. And somehow, that's what led me to the one who was. Thank you.